Okay, welcome to another episode of Roll or Die. We've got a big name for you today, guys. Probably one of the
I
biggest
thought I
names, I
was on.
think. You are on. One of the
No,
biggest
she's talking
names
about
that-
me, man. She's talking
Yeah.
about me.
When someone has their own Wikipedia page, we know they're a big name. So
That is true.
that is who we have today. I don't even know what degree number black belt you are, but we have Elvis Sinosic.
Fourth degree.
Yeah, fourth
Amazing.
degree black belt.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolute pleasure,
And-
brother. We're just talking about how I think I have met you once before. It was in America at the Drysdale gym with Tiago when we were doing World Masters, and yeah, so you know Tiago Stefanucci, right? Now, how did
That's
you
correct.
meet him?
Yeah, no, I know Drysdale quite well. He's come over to Australia a few times. We've hosted him here at King's Academy, and I was over there training at Drysdale's in preps for the Masters Worlds. I met Tiago through the scene, kind of in passing a couple of times. I think through Boa Super 8 and
Yeah.
because I commentated on that show. I think I had someone on the show once. So I kind of knew Tiago, but got to know him a lot better over there. It was great, the Aussie spirit, all the Aussies, regardless what gym we were from, supporting each other. I also happened to moonlight as a photographer, so I had my fluoro orange photographer's vest at the Worlds as well. So I got to take some photos of Tiago in action during his run over there.
Awesome,
so yeah, it was
man.
good fun.
That's brilliant.
Fantastic. And Elvis, you're also a very accomplished MMA fighter. You've been in the UFC. You've been everywhere. Anton, I don't know if you want to share your screen and share some of Elvis's.
Crazy. This blew my mind. I don't even believe this. Is this true? Did you make this shit up? Like, according to this, you have fought Michael Bisping, Forrest Griffin, who else stands out? Evan Tanner, Tito Ortiz, Frank Shamrock. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a bit of a who's who in the old school list of fighters. And most of those fights I kind of took on short notice as well. It was just one of the things I did back in the day. It's kind of funny. I look back and, now I'm a pioneer of the sport, but at the time I was just doing something that I found interesting. No one else was doing. I fought in the first ever MMA event here in Australia that Mario Sperry actually ended up winning. I was the first Australian to fight in the UFC, first Australian to fight for a UFC title. Fought in the first ever UFC show in London, which happened to be in the Royal Albert Hall, which is pretty cool. Fought in the first ever show in Manchester. Was supposed to fight in the first ever show in Sydney, but sadly injury pulled me out. But at least I was involved with that show. And then just on the MMA, on the technical front, I did the first ever attempted Goga-Plata in MMA in rings. I did the first what we call the dead Elvis. So I think then they now call the dead orchard in MMA. So
right.
10th
planet.
That's 10th planet. That's just on the MMA side. Obviously, I won the first ever Open Division, Pan Pacific Open Division in Australia. I was the first Australian to compete in the ADCC World Championships. I was the first person in ADCC history to win via a heel hook submission. So yeah, I've kind of been around the block a couple of times since then.
Well, first thing I want to say is Kim is the worst at introducing because she missed all of that.
Well, I was just going to say, Anton tells me off for always calling people OGs, but honestly, with that back catalogue, you got to be the most OG guest that we've ever had on.
Absolutely.
You really are.
It's a pleasure to be OG with you guys.
Oh, thanks, man. So what's like looking back, is it as scary? Is it like yeah, do you have moments that you like, do you have regrets? Or do you not have regrets through all of those things?
No, look, it was just, I did what was, in hindsight, there are things I could have done better. Like I didn't, like the way fighters do today, I didn't manage my career. I just went out looking for the greatest challenge out there. The toughest fight, what would get me, because my journey originally, so I kind of got into MMA and it was about testing myself. So first what I wanted to do was to test my courage. Like I'd been doing various martial arts for many years. I'd done Taekwondo and Judo and a few other bits and pieces. And I just wanted to know that if faced with danger or confrontation, that I would have the courage to actually fight back. I mean, that was kind of stage one. And then part two was I wanted to know whether the techniques I was learning were actually effective. So it was kind of just a test. And the first time I fought, it was never really supposed to go anywhere. It was just I just wanted to go in there, throw myself in the cage, see what happens, and then pretty much move on with life. But it kind of caught my attention, and I really enjoyed it. And it just turned into a career pretty much by accident. The martial arts is something that I've always valued, and I knew that part of it would always be something that I would have in my life. I just didn't really realize the magnitude at which it would take over my life. Like now, obviously I've been fighting for years. I've been competing in jiu-jitsu for years. I now, head over to still whenever I can, no-gi worlds and masters worlds. I run King's Academy, one of the largest academies in Sydney. I also own a UFC gym in MacArthur Square. I oversee the UFC gym jiu-jitsu program across Australia. So yeah, it's martial arts has really become, a large part of my life. It's literally my life outside of home. Like it's my home away from home. I know it sounds silly, but I probably spend more time at the gym than I do at my own house with my own family. So I'm actually looking forward to finally bringing my son here so I can spend more time with him.
Awesome, man. Awesome.
So, you've got a huge MMA background. We are, I guess, also primarily a jiu-jitsu podcast. Can you tell us about your jiu-jitsu journey? Like, how did you get started in that? How did that all take shape?
Well, I first discovered jiu-jitsu through the pages of, I think it was two magazines, Blitz, which was at the time owned by John Will, and Australasian Fighting Arts. So I had seen a couple of mentions of it. There was, John Will had gone over to Brazil to kind of, because he used Blitz as his kind of platform to travel the world and discover lots of different martial arts. And there was a Brazilian who actually came over and had a $50,000 challenge. He said, I'll put up 50,000, you put up 50,000, winner takes all. And John's like, oh, this is very interesting. And he'd already, he was the Salat world champion. He'd been over to the Indonesia, been to the wrestling pits of India, and he was trying different stuff. And he goes, well, this could be interesting. I wouldn't mind kind of throwing my hat in, but he's also a very educated, very perceptive person. He goes, I should learn a little bit more about where this guy comes from. So he goes, I'll use Blitz and I'll head over to Brazil and do some training. And he discovered very quickly the effectiveness of jiu-jitsu. He tells a story about a kind of a 15, 16-year-old, which kind of ties him up in knots. And he goes, oh, can we add strikes? And they go, yeah, no problems. You can punch, and the 15-year-old, 16-year-old can slap, and basically tied him up and slapped him up in class. And he's like, well, I'm going to continue doing this. And he pretty much introduced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Australia because he brought it back from that trip, and obviously didn't take up the challenge from that black belt that was over for a short while. So I kind of discovered his journey there, and it was something that I wanted to kind of add myself. At the time, I was in Canberra, so there were no jiu-jitsu schools. I'd been doing martial arts for years, and I had stopped while I was at university and actually taken up volleyball and had become a pro beach volleyball player.
Wow.
Wow.
So
you've got so many feathers in your cap.
I know. I get around.
We're not going to have a title for this one, Anton. It's going to be very difficult to come up with.
Two, etc. But yeah,
go on. Sorry.
But yeah, so I kind of ended up looking for somewhere to train. So one of my friends had, I started working at, was then termed ADAB, which then became AusAid, which was a government department that provided aid to, the local Pacific Islands and things like that. So he turned up, he goes, hey, check this VHS tape. And for the people that don't know what VHS is, it's YouTube in a little box. that you put into a player and you play your YouTube videos on your TV. So,
and it's also not as good as beta. But anyway, do go on.
hey, let's.
That's a whole other podcast.
That was very big at the time, the beta VHS wars. But so I had a VHS tape of UFC 2. You know, had already kind of discovered jiu-jitsu through the John Will articles. But then I saw Royce Gracie, you know, winning UFC 2, and I'm like, oh, this is definitely something I want to do. And funnily enough, my workmate who gave me the tape gave me a entry form to a national all-stars. I know, which is kind of point fighting. It was a little bit different, but he goes, look, I challenge you to take this up. And I'm like, oh, okay. I hadn't done martial arts for quite, 4 years or something. So I basically pulled out the yellow pages. And again, for the people who are listening, the yellow pages was this big, thick, fat yellow page book, which was like Google, where you looked up businesses and things like that. So I pulled out the yellow pages, went to the martial arts section, scrolled down, and I tried to find something suitable. And I found a Jun Fan school. So it was, for those that don't know, Jun Fan was the style Bruce Lee did. And it had stick fighting, Muay Thai, and grappling. I'm like, well, look, I've got the grappling. I get to do a little bit of that jiu-jitsu I'm hearing about. I had already done judo in my past, so I had a familiarity with grappling. I'd done taekwondo. I was already a black belt in taekwondo. So I went and joined up that academy, and then I put in my application to compete at the National All-Stars. I ended up, I think, winning that event. I won a couple of events through the year in the ACT, and ended up going to the National All-Stars Nationals in Melbourne, which I ended up getting disqualified for excessive contact. So it's probably why I changed
styles.
Again, it was just more for the challenge. I just enjoyed competing and kind of challenging myself. But it kind of also got me into the grappling. As I said, I was playing pro beach volleyball. So I ended up moving to Sydney, finding a gym, which was Anthony Lange, who was up in Manly. So I started, which was perfect because the pro beach was happening down at Manly Beach. So I got my jiu-jitsu and my pro beach happening all at the same time. So I ended up moving there, starting my jiu-jitsu journey. And that's kind of, in a very complicated roundabout way, how the journey started.
Amazing. Wow. Well, first thing is, it's lucky, with the yellow pages back in the day, as you know, it started at A for those listeners who don't know. So it's very lucky you didn't join like Aardvark Jiu-Jitsu or Aardvark or Abacus martial arts. But yeah, that's probably why I joined Absolute MMA. I'm really lazy. I didn't look past.
Get to the top end. That'll do.
But that is epic, man. And like, going back to the cage fighting stuff, like, you just seem like a really down-to-earth, easygoing guy. And like, looking through your Wikipedia page, you've got a lot of interest, like you've been in politics, etc., etc. But stepping into a cage back at UFC 70 with Michael Bisping, who is a very outspoken, cocky, arrogant, but a great guy. I think a great guy, but still a bit of an animal in some ways. What's that like? Like, what is it like when you're doing this as something to test yourself and you're stepping?
Well, look, I should point out that I actually first stepped in the octagon in UFC 30.
Wow.
Which was the first time that Zuffa actually ran an event. So that was
against Jeremy Horn. You're right. Sorry, my bad.
Yes. So they'd purchased it off SEG. So I was really OG days. Literally, it was the last. SEG had done their last show. Zuffa had done their first show. Mm-hmm. So by the time I got to UFC 70, it was like I was an old hat at it.
I was looking at the wrong order. My bad. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
Then Tito Ortiz. My God, hang on a second. Tito Ortiz is a freaking animal, man. So, okay.
Yeah. He was a monster at the time.
Yeah. No, yeah.
But just going, like, I'll go a little bit back. So I had the first fight in 97, which was the Australasian UFC, which they got sued and got renamed to Cage Combat 1. And that was the event that Mario Sperry was at. As I said, it's the first time I'd ever fought. I won my first match. And funnily enough, the guy I beat was a guy called Matt Rocker, who was a Lions Den guy. And in his corner was a fairly nondescript person named Frank Shamrock, who I would meet again later on, several years later. I ended up then after that event, fighting in the Australasian Ballet Judo Open. For those that don't know, Ballet Judo pretty much translates to anything goes in Brazilian Portuguese. And it was a crazy event. It had a octagonal ring with chains instead of ropes. So I ended up winning the heavyweight. So I won the first ever Australian heavyweight MMA title. Yeah, crazy story. But anyway, we can always go back later. I then ended up going to rings, fighting in rings in Japan. Didn't compete for a few years. Ended up getting an opportunity to go to fight in an event called UCC1, Universal Combat Challenge, which later on became TKO, which is the event that GSP came out of. So I fought in their first ever event. Oh, there you go, another first. So I fought in their first event for the heavyweight title. I wasn't even supposed to fight in their event. I was meant to fight on their second show without having a tournament. I wanted to fight at light heavyweight, but they had too many light heavyweights. So they said, would you fight in heavyweight? And I'm like, yeah, I'll do whatever. So I was supposed to fight in their heavyweight tournament. But then 2 weeks before the show, one of the opponents pulled out, and it's a very complicated story, but I ended up fighting 2 10-minute rounds, a 20-minute match against Dave Beneteau, who was at the time 265 pounds, which is, I think, 120 kilos. And I actually had to put weights in I had to put ankle weights on to make the weight so I would be in the division, because it was a heavyweight division. And I believe it had to be over 215. I think I was walking around about 210. Which I think
the first Aussie to cheat in
about 95 kilos. I need to be about 97 or something like that. So I put ankle weights on to make the division. It actually ended up going the distance, and I got a draw, even though I dislocated my opponent's knee with leg kicks during the fight, but then the referee stopped it to allow him to recover. And then crazy story. But anyway, so I got that draw, and then that gave me an opportunity to fight Frank Shamrock, who, as I mentioned, was in the corner of Matt Rocker when my first ever fight. Ended up going 5 rounds with Frank Shamrock in K1. Frank was using that because he wanted to springboard into Pride, which was an event I also wanted to fight in, which I never sadly got onto. But it was one of the first MMA fights in K1. So I got to fight Frank. It ended up going the distance. I lost a close decision. Because I went the distance with Frank, and Frank had beaten both Jeremy Horn and Tito Ortiz and stopped them both in the UFC 30. Jeremy was supposed to fight a BJJ black belt named Cafe Dente, who ended up getting staph, big hole in his leg. And 2 weeks before, I got a call saying, hey, we need a last-minute replacement because you fought both. Because you'd fought Frank, who had beaten both Jeremy and Tito. I had a backstory that they could kind of slot me in. So technically, I was not supposed to win that match. I got kind of thrown in because everyone was talking about Jeremy versus Tito, and this was Jeremy's opportunity to fight for the title. So he had to, because he'd already choked out Chuck Liddell, put him to sleep. So I got thrown in on short notice. Pretty much everyone had written me off, said I would lose the match in under 3 minutes. So there was a paper called Full Contact Fighter, where people, it's like the internet, but on paper, and where people had put their predictions in, and not a single person had picked me. Everyone said Jeremy would win under 3 minutes by submission. So my goal was to beat him by submission under 3 minutes. So 2 minutes, 59 seconds. I got the job done. So I was kind of pretty proud about that. And it's kind of funny because I literally had such a short period of time. I had a very specific game plan on what I wanted to do, and I literally pulled it off move for move.
That's amazing.
The finish I got was a little bit different to what I'd practiced, but it was along the lines. It was always about triangle arm bars. So I won my first match with a dead Elvis, which was kind of like a double arm triangle. And I kind of arm barred him from there. So that was the kind of the journey into there. So as you can imagine, from UFC 30 to UFC 70, which is 40 shows later, I was well into MMA. So stepping in against Bisping was pretty much a walk in the park. Like, don't get me wrong, it was a very tough match, and a lot of things went wrong in the lead up to it. But by that point, it's just kind of second nature. And it's kind of interesting. Tito and Bisping were very similar. So they were both guys that had a very strong public or social media type personality, very brash, outspoken, but behind the scenes, both super nice guys. The difference was with Tito, when I met him before the fight, he was actually really chill. We were really good. We did a photo shoot. He was trying to make me laugh while we're trying to do stare off, face offs and stuff like that. He was cool. Bisping was very similar to Frank Shamrock in the fact that he could not be nice or talk to his opponent because he had to kind of hate who he was fighting before he stepped in the cage. Whereas I was like, I couldn't give up, two figs. So the funny thing for me is I was a bigger fan than I was a fighter. So I actually went to all these shows and used it as an opportunity to meet and get photos with other fighters. I literally had Uriah Faber come up to me at one of the shows going, hey, I'm a big fan. Do you mind if I get a photo with you? I'm like, holy shit, Uriah Faber. I think this was
I'm a big fan.
I had Rashad Evans come up to me to get a photo with me after he'd won the Ultimate Fighter. And I'm embarrassed to say I hadn't watched that season and I had no idea who he was. It wasn't until afterwards, like watching, I'm like, oh, holy shit, that's the guy that came up and wanted his photo with me. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool.
That's meant to be. When you're famous, you want to be able to. Rashad would have felt good that you didn't recognize him because that's the thing. He's idolizing you. So he doesn't want you to think, you're on even territory. He wants you to think that you're up a notch. So there you go, man. That's
but the funny thing is, I kind of never saw myself in that way. It was just, I'm that guy, I'm that fan who's allowed to get in the cage. So that's kind of how I looked at it. I'm having fun, I'm meeting people. And while I'm there, I may as well just jump in the cage, throw some elbows, try and go for a couple of submissions, and then go back and party afterwards with all these famous people. Right?
Elvis, we're not got a lot of time left, and I'm a bit hesitant to bring this up, but I feel I'd be remiss not to because, Anton touched on it briefly before. You have had a bit of a political career, or you've put your hat in the ring there. Can you tell us very briefly about that?
Actually, just to be transparent about time, this call will end in 7 minutes 40 seconds, right? So based on that.
Well, I will say now, I'm up for a second one. Just let me know when. So I'll very quickly go. Awesome. Like most of the gyms across Australia, I own 2 gyms. I got shut down. The first time my gym got shut down, I managed to recover from it. The second time I got shut down, it was a week after I'd opened up my second gym. I was in major financial strife. We'd been locked down. We'd been given curfews. We'd been, I'm complaining, and I know what Victorians have been through, just what I went through pales in comparison, but I felt that we needed a voice, and that's why I decided to run for the federal election. Didn't go my way. I'm now looking at the New South Wales state election. I plan to run again. And then depending how that goes, if I win my seat, then I'll, we'll fight for our rights in Parliament. If that doesn't, then I'll look at the next federal election. I felt that jiu-jitsu players, martial artists, gyms, fitness centers needed a greater voice. That's part of it. Also, my community, again, was particularly hard hit. We were treated different to the rest of Sydney. I believe they needed a voice. So, there's a lot of different reasons. I didn't agree with the way a lot of things were done. As I said, my business was shut down. My son was born during the lockdown. My family didn't get to see him. I got put in jail for being out of my LGA, and all sorts of stuff kind of happened that kind of made me realize that the best way to fight this is through the system. So I'm not someone that argues or complains. If something needs to be done, I go out there and do it. As you can tell by my martial arts career, I kind of took that attitude. I'm not afraid of the fight. And I'm also of the belief, just because I lost on the first attempt, it's not a chance to give up. I wanted to keep going. So hopefully I got that through very quickly, and then
my God. I'm inspired
we can look at another time to follow through the rest of the story.
Absolutely, that's super
awesome.
inspiring.
I will definitely have you on again.
Yeah, you're out to make a difference, man, in your communities, and that's actually what the martial arts community represents to me. People who are willing.
It's what I do. As you know, it's what I do every single day here. My goal is to help people. As much as I make a living, my goal is I love martial arts and jiu-jitsu and kickboxing, boxing, wrestling, all that, because it helps so many people. Like I see kids who become more confident, who start improving at school. I see adults who become more social and become more confident and start improving at work and different things. I see friendships and relationships built along with skills, you know, and as you know, I've had a couple of junior world champions through the gym. I've seen guys winning belts and medals at championships. So it's great to kind of see all this sort of stuff happening, but it's more the everyday person that I can help and see their lives improve and see how much happier they are walking out than they are walking in.
Absolutely. We always like to let people kind of like, there's 4 minutes left, man, and I'm sorry to keep bringing back to time, but I would love you like from all of the journey so far, and we're definitely going to have you back, man. There's just no way we can't. But from all of the journey you've had so far, what are the key takeaways for you at this point in your journey that you would like to share?
I think the biggest thing is martial arts has really made a big difference. Everything I do and the way I approach everything in life comes from what I've learned on the mats. You know, whether it's kickboxing or boxing or jiu-jitsu, it has made me more resilient. It's made me realize that adversity isn't an enemy, but an opportunity to get better. If I lose, it's an opportunity. It's that old cliche, you either win or you learn. And I've really taken that on board. So I take any loss, whether it's in life or anything. And I'm also not afraid of difficulty, because like there's been a couple of times where I've been in dire financial trouble, you know, literally tens, hundreds, thousands of dollars in debt, and I've managed to work my way out, because if you knuckle down, work hard, and believe in what you're doing and give it your all, you can succeed, regardless what it is in life. And it's that attitude on the mats and in the cage and in the ring that have really molded me in the way I approach things. And look, and most importantly, have fun. I enjoy myself. Like, regardless of what happens, I always try and make the most of every situation. And I just don't hold on to the bad things that have happened in the past. As I said, I use it more as an opportunity to get better.
I love you, man. You're inspirational as hell.
Awesome. Yeah, that is fantastic. Now, I'm very inspired as well. I'm pretty sure our listeners will be too. So thank you so much for taking the time today, Elvis. And like Anton said, we would love to have you back on maybe next year when you can keep.
Yeah, look, would love to. It would be a great opportunity. Thank you for having me on. Hopefully by next year, I have my 5th degree. So I'll be forging forward with that as well. So, and
you'll be Prime Minister of Australia as well, hopefully. That's the plan.
It may take a little bit longer than next year, but hey, it's not off the books.
You got my vote, brother. You got my vote.
Yeah. No problem. Thank you so much. We'll have this out in a couple of weeks. If you could share it on your social media, Elvis, that would be awesome, because that would really help grow our audience. So that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Send me the links and I'm more than happy to share it.
Can do.
Awesome.
Cheers, brother.
Oh, good. All right. Thank you once again. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you around soon.
See you soon.
Take care, guys. All the best. Have a great weekend.
See ya.
Bye. You
Bye.
too.